Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again on my YouTube channel. This is Workshop Quick Takes. If you own a 97 to 2001 Jeep Cherokee XJ with the AW4 automatic transmission, then you may have noticed that you have transmission cooler lines. Those lines have to pass up under the passenger side engine mount on their way over, and the passenger side engine mount also requires clearance for the upper control arm on the front axle to come up. And unfortunately, if your suspension hardware is worn, or if you've just been abusing it really hard, that arm can crash into those lines and crush them, and then you don't get fluid flow through them. Worst case, you might even manage to puncture one. Here is Moab, Utah, and here is a Jeep that would like to be there. But it's not going to get very far in the desert with damaged transmission cooling lines, so let's take a look at where those are. At the front of the Jeep, of course, is the radiator. Behind that is the rest of the drivetrain: engine, transmission, and transfer case. Today we don't care about the transfer case, so let's look at the other three components. On the side of the transmission are a pair of ports. The front one, shown here in red, is the hot feed out to the radiator, and the blue one, surprise surprise, is the return. The line from the feed comes out, over the axle, and then ducks under the engine in a funny little loop. From there it goes into the lower entrance of the radiator on the driver's side. Cold return exits from the top of the radiator, comes down in front of the harmonic balancer, and then interfaces to a third line that returns to the port. Today there are potentially 5 pieces you may need to service: the 3 lines and the 2 port fittings. So today I'm going to show you step by step how to go through the complete process of replacing those, including some pitfalls you may run into. I'm calling this episode the right wrong way because this is the right way in that it replicates the complete OEM setup, but it can also be the wrong way in that if you don't solve the other problems you've got going on, those lines are just going to get crushed again and again and again, and you might want to consider a different long-term solution. There is one. We'll talk about it on another episode, but for today, let's look at the complete OE fix. One way to tell that a previous owner of your Cherokee had a lot of fun with it is that you happen to look underneath, say, the rear wheel well here, and you see something like that. Yeah. Lines up pretty neatly with some of the axle hardware down there, doesn't it? Another way to tell is looking under the front here is those 2 transmission cooler lines. Yeah, notice how that actually lines up pretty neatly with the OE upper control arm support on the axles. Now what that means is I'm going to have to change out those transmission oil cooler lines all the way from the transmission up to the radiator. Looking underneath to see what's what, this is an AX4 automatic transmission, and I see a quick connect there and another quick connect there. Looking at it from below, that's one there and one there. And then that line, where does that run? Up here. That runs up here past the starter, and then continues, jumps up over the axle, and then continues from there toward the front of the vehicle. Yeah, and then they come out in the front of the vehicle right there. One of them ducks up right here past the harmonic balancer, and then both of them end up at the radiator. One of them hits a little quick connect right there onto a small little nipple that takes off the radiator, and the upper one here, well, this whole piece goes through another, actually has another quick connect down here. You could actually replace the hose up to this point down here without replacing the whole thing, but I believe that step 1 is going to be taking out the auxiliary electric fan. I don't think I'll be able to get to either of these down here without removing that. Alright, before we go outside and put the parts in the car, let's take a quick look. There are 3 of them that are definitely going to be needed. Well, 2 for sure, although you'll probably end up replacing this one as well. We'll talk about that here in a second. This, I believe, is the line to the lower entrance of the radiator. I happen to get this at NAPA. These are still available at some auto parts stores. I don't know for sure which ones, but NAPA had them. This one here is 827-5298 at NAPA if you're interested in trying to find it. The first time I was at the parts counter, they went back, they got it, they had that part number on it, and guess what? The line in here didn't look anything like this one. It didn't have this right angle curve at all, and it was 2 lines clipped together. So packaging errors do happen. It's a good idea just to take a quick look, compare the website, compare the original part if you've happened to brought it in with you. This piece over here is a quick clip fitting into the transmission. This one over here is a quick clip fitting onto the lower section of the radiator inlet for the transmission cooler. Next one we have here, one part number away, is 8275297. This one has, again, another quick clip into the transmission, and then on this end, it has another quick clip, but this quick clip does not go directly into the radiator. Instead, you may optionally also replace 8275285, again, NAPA Solutions. That just happened to be where I got it. And what this one does is this one quick clips into the other one, but on this side, the top exit from the radiator has a threaded fitting and a flared end with, it looks like some little, maybe copper seal in there or something. In any case, you might not have to replace this one. You might be able to remove the quick clip and just replace the lower hose. The last piece I bought, which I will return if I can, is 7304978. This is the quick clip that happens to be on the transmission, and there's two of these, and ideally I won't have to replace either, because what happens is this unplugs and then you can pull the line with it. However, there's two possible problems. One is that this O-ring may fail, and then you've either got to decide what to do. Do you just replace this assembly for $15, or do you replace just the O-ring? You can, of course, get universal O-ring kits at, say, like this one, for example, that I got from Harbor Freight, and maybe one of these would be pretty close. But in this case, you can also just buy this fitting with the exact one. The other thing I'm worried that might happen when I go to change those two is that maybe on one of them, this plastic clip will break, because these lines exit on the side right next to the exhaust pipe, so who knows how brittle these will be. Now, to show you how these are supposed to work, let's go ahead and just unbag one of these lines here. You pull out this quick connect, clip it over gently, and then what happens is it snaps gently into there, and I'm not going to press it all the way because I haven't lubed up the seal in there, and I don't want to rough it up, but basically that would snap back in place. And these are on pretty secure. In order to get them off of the old lines and reuse them, you're going to have to do that and that, which seems like nothing on this fresh pliable plastic, but on one of those old ones it may turn out to be very brittle, I don't know. So I went ahead and bought one of these preemptively, and hopefully that gets me through the job. If I don't need it at all, great, I'll return it, but I decided I'd hedge my bet and just pick up one while I was there. The other issue you're going to find doing this job is, at least once on the radiator, you're going to have to remove one of these steel clip quick connects. If you look closely, you can kind of see that there's 4 little metal tabs in there, and when I put one of the other ends, like this, into that, then these slip past those spring clips and it won't pull back out again without causing a severe amount of damage. So, to pull one of those out intentionally, you're going to need some sort of tool that will wrap around the pipe and compress all 4 of those springs at once so that you can then just draw the assembly out. You could probably fabricate one from some kind of soft plastic if you really wanted to, but your auto parts store also has kits that are made for this, and there's some different types of plastic ring kits that are designed for doing fuel lines, which often have some more fragile plastic connectors or whatever. But for a nice sturdy steel connection like this, I just grabbed a pair of the steel tools, and we'll see which one actually does the trick, because honestly these were only like $8 or $9 each, and this one here is a dual, this one here is a quad. So you've got 4 different sizes on this one and 2 different sizes on this one. And of course the way this works is if the line was installed, you'd be wrapping this around here, figuring out what the matching size is. That one looks like a pretty good match there, so let's just take that over here and see that if I was wrapping that around a pipe and then pushing it in here, it's going to compress all 4 of those springs simultaneously. I can squeeze this just a little bit if necessary to scissor it and pop it out. And this might be easy to overlook, but the last thing you're going to want to have on hand is some automatic transmission fluid that's compatible with your vehicle. In this case, I happen to pick Lucas off the shelf. For my 2000 Jeep Cherokee, I need at least Dexron 2 or better, and this one is rated Dexron 3, Americon, and also ATF Plus. Should work just fine to replace whatever fluid I lose out of the system when I disconnect those hoses. Okay, my step 1 is going to be removing this electric fan, which is going to make it much easier to access a quick connect fitting down there, as well as this flare fitting here. These are currently installed with 8mm bolts, but I did replace those, so I'm not sure what the OEs would be. Okay, I now have fairly ready access to a fitting here and this fitting over here, and it looks like I'm going to need 2 wrenches to get at that, so I have to work out what those are. For the next step, there's a tie strap right here, I believe that is another 8. We will of course be reusing this, and that is metal, so I'm going to have to pull that on and off carefully. There's another strap like that one back here. Bent up a bit, but clear that out of the way. And one more here at the front of the engine. Okay, that should be all the hardware we have to remove in order to continue with this. Now, however, we have to start removing some of the quick connect fittings under there. And I'm going to start with a drain pan on the transmission end and see how much fluid comes out of the line and heads that direction before I disconnect anything up here. Okay, this next step requires me to be trapped between the tires, and even though the vehicle is fully parked and not lifted off the ground, might take a chance. Okay, I'm not expecting either of these fittings to be pressurized. I'll try and remove them with a rag around them. A little awkward because I need to pull in on these 2 plastic clips while simultaneously pulling on the pipe. Okay, that one's loose. One side clipped in, other side might need a screwdriver. And there we go. We are getting some ATF out of there. And there just came a little ring or fitting. Another good thing to catch when you're pulling a line like that. Decent amount of fluid running out of that. A little gotcha to watch out for when pulling these lines in this next step here is, if you look up, starter wiring is directly above this line, so I want to make sure I don't accidentally push the line up there and hit that. So there's a couple things I could do. I could disconnect the battery, which is probably what I should do. Losing a fair amount of ATF here, though. I'm surprised. Okay, so let's see what it takes to get a crescent wrench on the back of this here so that we can... And now I believe we need a 19 to remove this other end. Okay, that's how you make it work with metric tools. But if you have an English wrench set, then a 15/16 box end and a 3/4 box end work a little bit better. Use the 15/16 to hold the larger bushing next to the radiator and a 3/4 to turn off the flare end. The fitting you're trying not to turn is threaded into the radiator tank. If you loosen it, it will seep ATF. Not the end of the world, you can rewrap it with Teflon tape and put it back in, but it's frustrating to have to go back and do that later. Finally, tie the finger of a nitrile glove over the end of the hose to prevent it from dripping while you're working. The bottom one down here is going to be a little trickier because it looks like we have to get to one of those quick connects. Boy, is that in there tight. I'm not even sure if I can get at that with this tool. This one connector here will be the most frustrating part of this entire event, and there's just no way around it. The stub off of the OEM radiator is just too short to get a tool down in there effectively and remove that last quick connect. One thing you can do, which worked for us, although it still wasn't an easy fix, was to actually shave off a little bit of the extra length from the snap tool we got at the auto parts store, and then it was a little bit easier to work it down in there around that odd curve. But one way or another, you do have to get this one off in order to finish the job. Your only other option, if you want to take it, is to cut the hose and then reassemble it to the new hose using a hose barb and a couple clamps. The last step is to disconnect the fitting underneath the engine and then start working everything out. 2 points of caution. First, there's still going to be some fluid retained in the lines, so you'll want to try and get that out nicely, or maybe just block off the ends with something. Second, now that everything is loose, there is still a risk again of mashing one of those lines up into the starter and causing a short circuit. So if you haven't disconnected your battery, pay real close attention to what's going on over there. Okay, there's our lines compared side by side. Right about here is where we have the biggest problem. It's pretty amazing to me that that one line didn't actually get cut all the way through, because it surely came close. But okay, first line I want to feed through is going to be this one that wraps around and comes to the front of the transmission case. So we'll try and get that one routed in and then see if we can reconnect it to the quick connect on the bottom of the radiator, and then that way that one's out of the way and we can then work on the top one. I'm also going to have to pull, I think, all these off last, and then reattach them one by one once I see how the pipes fit under there correctly. Third and finally, I also need to get these plastic clips off of here and attach those onto there, so I might as well do that now too. That could use a little cleaning before I try to reinstall it on anything. Okay. There it is. Oh, that was way too close for comfort. That one, however, is going to come down and right about there, I believe. Looks good. Put just a tiny amount of lube on this here. The ATF probably has plenty, but why not? Looks like that tube might need just a little bit of tweaking. During this process, you'll probably find that the hardware you've purchased to replace your damaged tubes doesn't quite line up. That's to be expected. You may have to bend and tweak things a bit. Of course, it also doesn't help if you damaged a fitting during disassembly. Remember that little ring that we noticed that fell into the transmission oil? And there just came a little ring or fitting. Another good thing to catch when you're pulling a line like that. I wasn't paying attention when I took it apart and one of these fell out in the oil waste pan, and then when I tried to put it back together it was jamming. So I look in here and you can see that the O-rings popped out of position and kind of bound up in there. So yeah, it's kind of distended. I don't think it's usable anymore. That was why I picked up the spare. I mean, I was hoping to be able to return it, but here it is, so I guess I might as well go install it. Unless you remove the exhaust, it's almost impossible to film the installation of one of these. But this hexagonal shape, yeah, that's a box-in wrench or a socket. The size is English, 7/8 inch, so if you're working with metric tools, it's going to be a bit of a problem. You might get it with a badly worn 22mm, but otherwise you need 23, which is uncommon. But if you think you don't have a 7/8 socket, ask yourself, have I ever changed out an oxygen sensor? Because if you have an oxygen sensor offset socket, also 7/8. From this point forward, the job is going to be pretty much the reverse of what you did to get everything out. You're going to need to reroute lines, clip them together, reinstall those little tab connectors that hold everything together, and you know, if those little steel pieces with the insulation aren't quite doing the trick, you might try and buy the largest insulated conduit strap you can get over in the electrical section of your local home improvement store, bend it a bit, and use that as a suitable replacement. You just don't want a piece of bare steel against the lines themselves or it will chafe through eventually. And when all is said and done, you are going to have to add back roughly a quart of ATF into the transmission via the dipstick hole. Use a funnel. It'll help. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. Next time, we'll look at some options for not doing this the OE way, and you might say to yourself, is that wise? Well, yes and no. These are hydraulic lines. You really don't want to be making your own hydraulic lines, unless you want to end up in the morgue pre-oiled, in which case, go for it. But these lines, as far as I can tell from research, operate at maybe 60 PSI. That's in the range of a garden hose. We're not talking like power steering pump lines, so there are alternatives if you don't want to do the OE and want to do something else that you can maybe reroute so it doesn't subject to the same damage. We'll talk about that on our next episode. So if that's what you're looking for, tune in next time and we'll go through it then. Thanks for joining me. See you next time, whenever that is. Has anyone seen my phone?